Good evening, my dear listener. Wherever you are, whatever you carry with you in your mind tonight, you may set it gently down beside your bed, because for the next little while, however long you are here with me. In a place where stories unfold slowly, like petals in a breeze, and where time slips away like candle wax on ancient stone. Take a deep breath, now another, slower this time, and as the air leaves your lungs, so too does the weight of the day. Floating out into the quiet dark, tonight, I'd like to tell you a story, not of dragons or great wars, but of something much softer, stranger, and more secretive. We're going to walk together through a forgotten world, through hushed corridors of medieval palaces, where queens moved like whispers, and rumors fluttered like dust in shafts of sunlight. We'll meet women, royal and richly clothed, but who lived in layers of mystery, sometimes adored, sometimes feared, and sometimes misunderstood. They were queens, yes, and some were also what the court chroniclers of old called scandalous, but tonight we will not judge them. Instead, we'll let them live again in quiet memories, soft footsteps, rustling silks, and the secret corners of candle-lit chambers. And so we begin, in the 11th century. Let your mind drift gently to the crumbling steps of a stone tower. High above the rolling fog of early morning France, it's cold, but there's the faint smell of rosemary from the kitchens below. The fire in the hearth is low, but still burns with a soft pop and crackle. And there, by the window, sits a queen. Her name is Constance of Arles, married to King Robert Roman II of France. Constance was no gentle shadow of a king. She was a force not of noise or war, but of subtle manipulation, lavish style, and whispered rumors. Some monks wrote of her in scandalous terms, calling her pernicious, which is quite the word, isn't it? But imagine her instead now, not as a villain, but as a woman, sitting quietly, lacing her fingers in her lap, thinking. Her gown is dark burgundy, trimmed in gold. A hawk is perched quietly beside her, her favorite bird. She was not loved by the church. She spoke too sharply. Wore gowns considered indecent, for the time too low, too fitted, too daring. She smiled when she should have frowned, and when the bishop scolded her, she laughed with her eyes. They didn't like that, but behind the veil of politics was daily life. She brushed her hair by firelight. She ate cherries soaked in wine. She walked barefoot on mosaic floors when no one was watching, and perhaps, just perhaps, she loved in ways the court disapproved of, private rooms, quiet rendezvous. Not unlike any noblewoman with time and privacy and power. The truth, we'll never know the full stories, but the flicker of her candle still glows faintly. In another part of the world, not too many years later, there was a different kind of queen. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Oh, Eleanor, powerful, restless, enchanting. Some called her wicked not because she was cruel, but because she was free. Imagine her court in Poitiers, filled with music and poetry, where she created the courts of love. These weren't courts of law, no. These were dreamy, philosophical spaces, where women judged love stories and knights debated virtue and desire. Gently, softly, ambient lute music would drift through carved wooden windows. Roses bloomed year-round in the inner courtyards, and Eleanor, dressed in soft velvet, listened and smiled. She had been Queen of France, and later Queen of England. She had scandal, yes. There were whispers of lovers, and not just one. The songs of troubadours mention her, with hidden meanings and clever metaphors. She rode horses like a man. She read ancient Latin love texts. She refused to be still. The church disliked her boldness. But she moved through the centuries like perfume in the folds of silk. Gentle, persistent, unforgettable. Did she break rules? Yes. Did she ruin lives? Some say so. But tonight, we leave judgment at the gate. Here, Eleanor is simply a woman in candlelight, laying her head back on a carved pillow, the scent of lavender on her wrists. We drift now to a smaller kingdom, to Naples, to a queen whose name still causes little gasps among those who study hidden histories. Joanna I of Naples, crowned in 1343, young, wild, they said, but what they meant was this: she didn't do as she was told. Some say she had lovers by the dozen. Others claimed she was married 4 times, and yet, Only faithful to her own desires, Joanna was clever. She governed with strategy. She built alliances with smiles. She used the church and outplayed its bishops. Was she perverted? Perhaps, if you ask a monk with a narrow mind and a cold heart. But if you sit with her for a moment, you'd find a queen who loved silk dyed in sea purple, who adored falconry, who kept musicians by her bed, not for sin but for sound. She believed in pleasure. Not always carnal but sensory. She believed in taste and texture and the slow beauty of living well. It's said that one night during a storm, she stood on the balcony of her castle, hair unbound, robes flying like a ghost, and laughed at the wind. That's the image we keep of her tonight. Not wild, but free, not perverted, but alive. Let the rain fall on stone now. Let it tap like fingers on the shutters. And we move again, across time, to the icy courts of Denmark. There we meet Margaret I, another queen with power. Margaret did not flaunt lovers. She flaunted control. Her enemies whispered that she was unnatural. Too smart, too cold, too calculating. Some said she wore men's clothes beneath her gown. Others claimed she never smiled, but in the stillness of the castle library, where candlelight flickers on Old Norse texts. You might have found her fingers tracing old runes. You might have heard her sigh as she read stories of old gods and fallen empires. She ruled 3 kingdoms. She didn't need lovers. Her pleasure was strategy. Her affection, if any, was given to quiet evenings by the fire, warm cider, and the endless satisfaction of knowing she'd outplayed every man around her. We honor her here not because of scandal, but because she was whispered about nonetheless. As we drift onward, the soft clink of goblets in the great hall fades, replaced now by the sound of bare feet on marble. We are walking with Isabella of France, wife of Edward Roman II. Some call her the she-wolf. But imagine her instead, lying awake at night, the fire dying, the chamber silent, her husband in love with another man, and her own future crumbling. She was not cruel by nature, but by necessity. She eventually took a lover of her own. She plotted. She conquered. But it began with pain. When people call her wicked, they forget the years she stayed quiet. They forget the cold glances across banquet tables, the loneliness of a marriage built for politics, the hours she spent alone, watching snow fall past the windows. She was a queen, yes, but she was also a woman, breathing, feeling, waiting, and so, here in the quiet of this story, we do not see her as a villain. We see her as someone who once curled up beside a fire, reading an old letter by candlelight, and wondered what would come next. And now, let your breath grow slower, your thoughts soft like feathers. The story we are weaving is not meant to startle or stir, but to gently carry you down the winding corridors of history, not the history of battles and blood, but of whispered power. Warm candles and secret hearts. We continue now. Not far from where the Rhine River curves like a ribbon through green hills, we meet Agnes of Poitou, Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. Her story doesn't begin with passion or scandal, but with quiet diplomacy. She was a girl of noble birth, taught to speak with grace, to pray with her head bowed, and to move through life like a shadow, never too loud, never too bright, but behind her eyes. There was watchfulness. Married young to Emperor Henry Roman III, Agnes bore children, managed courtly life, and waited. When Henry died, she ruled as regent for her son alone, surrounded by lords who did not trust her, bishops who did not respect her, and advisors who whispered behind her back. Still, she endured. There were rumors, yes, of advisors too close to her, of decisions made in candlelit corners, of a heart that may have strayed into comfort during her widowhood. But do we fault her for that? Imagine her now, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, walking slowly through the misty garden at dusk, the air heavy with lilac, her thoughts tangled but her steps graceful. This is not the story of a seductress. This is the story of a woman who stood at the center of an empire. In silence, her fingers ink-stained from letters she wrote by hand, her robes thick with winter embroidery, her chambers filled with the faint smell of sage. Let's leave her now in the softness of evening, and turn to a land of fire and sand castile. Here, a queen named Urraca sits in a cool stone hall, her back straight, her eyes like sharpened steel under the weight of her veil. Urraca of Leon and Castile, a queen in her own right, and not just a title by marriage, no, she was crowned, and with her crown came complications. She married a man who became her enemy. She had lovers. Some whispered that they were knights, others said they were monks. The church frowned. Her court gossiped, but Urraca, she ruled anyway. She signed documents in her name. She rode into battle, yes, with armor beneath her gown. But tonight you will not find her on a horse. You will find her in her private chamber, barefoot on cool stone floors, hands clasped behind her back as she listens to the wind. It's said she loved the scent of cinnamon and fresh parchment, that she slept with one candle always burning just in case she had to rise in the night to write something down. A thought, a line of poetry, a plan. Urraca was not soft in the way the church demanded, but her softness lived in different places, in her devotion to her land, in the careful way she folded her son's old tunics even after he was grown, in the letters she never sent. She was painted as wild. But in truth she was. Alone we move now, slowly, gently, to a kingdom caught between the East and West, Hungary, and here we find a queen not often named in textbooks, Elizabeth of Bosnia. Elizabeth was wife to King Louis I of Hungary. She was beautiful, clever, and quietly ambitious. But after Louis died, the kingdom did not welcome her gentle touch. Her enemies multiplied like mice in winter. To survive, she made choices, some say dark ones. She forged letters. She arranged a marriage for her daughter. She held secrets so tightly they turned to frost on her lips. Some chroniclers called her manipulative. Others suggested affairs with guards or tutors. But those are only shadows. Imagine her instead, sitting at a long wooden table, tracing the rim of a goblet, listening to the faint ticking of a water clock in the corner, her eyes watching the candle slowly melt. She missed her husband, but not entirely. She missed safety. She missed being able to walk through the rose gardens without a veil. She missed laughing freely. There are no records of her lovers. There are no clear confessions. But that never stopped historians from imagining. And tonight, we let go of the need to know. We just breathe with her, in the stillness. Her sigh, the only sound in the room. Now, further east still, we find ourselves in Byzantium, and here we meet Theodora Daukaina, not the famous Empress Theodora, no, but a lesser, known namesake, who served as Empress Consort in the 11th century. The court of Byzantium was not like the castles of the West. It was jeweled, perfumed, ceremonial beyond belief. Theodora was married to a man she did not choose as most were, and she spent her days rehearsing rituals and walking measured paths between chambers. But within the layers of protocol was a woman. She wrote poetry hidden in the margins of her psalters. She embroidered scenes not of saints, but of lovers. Her scandal, if it can be called that, was subtle. A visiting envoy once wrote of her eyes dark as ink, unreadable, and full of mischief. Another claimed she had a handmaiden who never left her side, and that the closeness was more than duty. Of course, these were only stories, but in the quiet hours, when the cathedral bells faded into the ocean breeze, Theodora would sit by her bath, toes dipping into warm water, and hum old songs. She was never accused formally of anything. And yet the whispers persisted long after she was gone, because even in a world of gold thread and incense, true softness, true intimacy could not be hidden. Now we return to Western Europe, to a land of green fields and heavy skies, to Scotland. Here we find a strange little piece of history, of a queen so elusive we're not even certain of all the details. Her name was Margaret Drummond. She was not crowned, not officially, but she was loved by King James Roman IV, deeply, openly, and she might have been pregnant with his child. She was described as sweet, voiced, red, haired, and clever. She lived in a modest estate not far from Stirling Castle. And then, one morning, she was found dead, poisoned, they say, along with her two sisters. Why? Perhaps because she was about to become too important. The church wanted the king to marry another, someone more suitable, more advantageous. Margaret was too loved, too close. Her story is short, but her presence lingers. Like the scent of heather in the breeze, she wrote poems, she played the harp. She once gifted the king a book of psalms with little pressed violets tucked between the pages. Her death remains a mystery, but tonight we see her not as a ghost, but as a girl, standing in the dew-covered grass at dawn, watching a hare dart through the bracken, her fingers cold, her heart full. And now, let the soft wind close this chapter. Our journey tonight is not over, but you may rest here for a while. Listen to the faint rustle of gowns down long hallways, the sleepy murmurs of distant courtiers, the final toll of the midnight bell. And if you're still awake, know that these queens, often called scandalous or sinful, were, in truth, simply human, and like you, they loved, they longed, they dreamed. Close your eyes now. There is more to come, but only when you're ready. And now we wander again, out of Byzantium's marbled halls and down into a quieter, more windswept place, northern France. In the late 1100s, our story gently opens upon Queen Ingeborg of Denmark, a quiet queen, a foreign queen, a queen who, for reasons never entirely made clear, was married, and then imprisoned. She was the wife of King Philip Roman II of France, but only briefly. Very briefly, shortly after their wedding, Philip cast her aside. He claimed the marriage had never been real, that it had been cursed, that something about her, her body, her scent, her soul repelled him. But Ingeborg had done nothing. She was pious, gentle, even elegant. Still, she was locked away in a convent, not allowed to leave, not allowed to return home, not given answers for years, and yet she never gave up the title of queen. Through snow-covered windows and lonely chapel walls, she wrote letters to the Pope. Long, aching letters full of logic and grace. She did not accuse. She did not scream. She simply reminded them that she was still a queen. Imagine her now, in a stone chamber, kneeling beside her bed. Her veil is pale gray. The candle beside her flickers, casting the shadow of a cross across the wall. She had no lovers, no scandal, and yet she was called cursed. Sometimes, the most unsettling thing a queen could be was unwanted. Now, our feet take us to Burgundy. Here we find Joan I of Navarre, queen consort of France in the 13th century. She was married to King Philip Roman IV, a man known as the Iron King, cold and unsmiling. Joan, by contrast, was warm, curious. She kept her own court in Navarre, far from her husband's gaze, and it was in Navarre that her world bloomed. Her court was full of art, wine, soft music, and intelligent conversation. She welcomed poets. She debated philosophy. She wrote letters in Greek and Latin, and she was loyal. But years later, long after her death, rumors bloomed like mold in a dark cellar. They said her daughters-in-law, married to her sons, had taken lovers. They said these women had secret meetings in towers, wrapped in cloaks, hidden from guards, that there were silk hoods and soft footsteps, laughter behind closed doors, and some claimed falsely, cruelly, that Joan had taught them, that her legacy wasn't wisdom, but seduction. But we know she had already died. She never saw the scandal. Still, her name was drawn into it, perhaps because she had ruled too well, had been too thoughtful, too independent. Tonight, we walk beside her not as an accusation, but as a tribute. We see her in her library, the scent of ink and tallow candles. Her hair tucked back, her gown simple and deep red. She's reading Virgil, her lips moving silently with each line. Let us leave her in that soft stillness. And now, we drift to the windswept shores of England. Here we find Anne Boleyn. Yes, her name is known, but strip away the heavy-handed dramatizations, the executions, the drama, and what remains is a woman who once danced beneath candlelight in a French court. Before she became queen, before her fall, she was a girl who loved music and laughter, who read religious tracts and whispered about God with intensity, who may have fallen in love more than once, but never in the way she's often portrayed. Anne was accused of many things: infidelity, witchcraft, incest. But let's pause here, let's breathe, and let's remember that these accusations were never proven. They were whispered by men in polished shoes, holding pens soaked in ambition. Imagine her instead on a quiet evening, brushing her hair slowly, a simple comb, a single mirror, her room lit only by firelight. She speaks softly to a maid, about a dream she had, about walking through fields of lavender. She does not know yet what is coming, and so we stay with her. In the moment before the storm, a moment of peace, now, we float east again, this time into the old realm of Poland, and there, in the court of Krakow, we find Queen Bona Sforza, Italian by birth, Polish by fate. Bona was clever, educated, and politically sharp. She brought Renaissance ideas to Poland: art, law, agriculture, and culture. But with her intelligence came resistance. She was rumored to be indulgent, not just in wine and food, but in matters of the heart. There were whispers of affairs, of secret lovers hidden beneath cloaks, of private gardens where guards dared not enter, of scented oils and veiled visitors. But these stories always came from those she threatened with her brilliance. She was feared, and to fear a woman is often to invent her sins. What she truly loved were plants. Yes, Bona kept detailed notes on gardening. She imported citrus trees, grew rare herbs, and filled her palace kitchens with things never seen before. Imagine her now, in a wide, brimmed hat, snipping rosemary with silver scissors, smiling faintly. Perhaps a letter rests in her apron. Perhaps it's from someone far away, or perhaps it's simply a recipe for lemon cake. We do not need to know. We only need to feel the peace of her garden. A breeze passes, carrying the scent of basil and summer rain. Let's rest here a while, with the sound of bees in the lavender, and the knowledge that not all queens ruled with swords. Some ruled with root and bloom, and now, deeper into night, we come to Sicily. Here, there was a queen known to few, Constance of Sicily. She was an old woman when she gave birth. Some said it was a miracle. Others said it was a lie. Some claimed she faked her pregnancy, that the child was stolen, that no woman her age could give birth. But Constance laughed at them. She invited bishops, nobles, even enemies into her chamber after the birth. She unwrapped the child herself. She showed the blood, the proof. She wanted no whispers, no doubts, but the whispers came anyway. Later, people claimed she had lovers in her youth, that she had lived in a convent too long, that she had grown strange, but in truth she was simply determined. She raised her son to be an Emperor Frederick Roman II, a man of art and science, a man of contradictions, and she faded into history's margins. But not tonight. Tonight, we see her in a tower room, wind howling outside, cradling her infant with slow, careful hands. She hums a lullaby, one from her youth, when she too had once been rocked to sleep in the arms of a queen. And so, our journey pauses again. You may notice your breath has grown slower, your eyelids heavier. The queens we've visited do not need to be judged tonight. They are soft memories now, drifting in and out of time. Like the scent of old parchment and perfumed linens, let your thoughts float gently with them. There is still more to come, but there is no hurry. Not here, not in this dream. The world outside your window is falling silent. And here in the glow of storylight, we return once more to a queen's chamber, this time in the lowlands of Flanders, where the fog creeps close to the earth and candle smoke hangs gently in the corners of high stone rooms. We begin with Margaret of York. She was not born a queen, not in name, but she was a duchess, a bride to Charles the Bold of Burgundy. Yet, when you say her name aloud, it rings with quiet royalty. She was English by birth, sister to Edward Roman IV, and married into a life of ceremonial beauty. In Burgundy, she became not just a wife, but a figure of soft power. Her gowns shimmered with silver thread. Her tapestries depicted not war, but gardens and lovers, birds with wings outstretched. She was not known for scandal, and yet the rumors danced like candlelight. They said she wore men's armor beneath her dresses when she traveled, that she had a fondness for one of her husband's squires, that she smiled too long when the court poet recited verses of longing. But perhaps she simply understood the art of suggestion. Imagine her now, walking slowly through a gallery at dusk, her hand trailing the edge of a painted silk wall. Her thoughts are not on politics, but on a scent she remembers, perhaps jasmine, from years ago. Margaret lived long after her husband's death. She kept court even in widowhood, proud, rich, and thoughtful. She collected books. She embroidered scriptures in gold thread. She fed doves from her window. When she died, they said her room smelled like lavender and parchment. She lived with grace, and just enough mystery to keep the poets dreaming. Let's turn now, gently, south to the kingdom of Aragon, where the sun is hotter, and the courtyards are filled with orange trees and the sound of fountains. Here we find Queen Violent of Hungary, wife to King James I of Aragon. She was young when she arrived at his court, quiet, watching, but Violent was not meek. Over time, she began to influence politics, to write letters on behalf of her husband, to organize cultural events, and eventually to speak more freely than a queen was expected to. She liked music, she liked verse, and she liked having a say in things. Later, chroniclers, especially those who preferred their queens silent, accused her of dominating, her husband of having too many opinions. One bishop went so far as to say she corrupted his spirit with words. But in truth, James admired her. He once wrote that she was the more clever of us two. Did she have lovers? We don't know. Did she meet with poets in private, with letters tucked into sleeves? We don't know that either. But we do know she lived with agency. And in a world that feared female agency, that alone was often seen as sin, let's imagine her now, seated in a tiled courtyard, a breeze fluttering through the lemon trees, her fingers wrapped around a cool goblet of sweet wine, her gaze on a horizon only she could name. From Aragon, we drift now toward the Holy Roman Empire, to a lesser-known figure, Adelaide of Susa, a noblewoman, yes, but in many ways more powerful than queens. She controlled key Alpine passes. She negotiated with emperors. She managed armies, land, and treaties. She was called proud, haughty, independent, but only because she never lowered her eyes when men spoke to her. She was widowed young, married again and again and again, and each time her land grew. Each time her reputation widened. Some said she had lovers, guards, priests, even her cousin, but the documents that survive. They show land deeds, military plans, letters to the Pope, nothing more. Adelaide's truest scandal was competence. Imagine her in her fortress at night, writing by oil lamp, her fingers smudged with ash, her hair braided down her back like rope. She doesn't need anyone to believe her story. She already knows it's true. Let us drift now, down, into Sicily once more. The Mediterranean moonlight falls across warm stone, and a queen walks barefoot across a mosaic floor. She is Isabella of Aragon, Queen of Sicily by marriage to Frederick Roman III. Her life was quieter than many, less written, less remembered, and yet in small chronicles she appears, not as a firebrand but as something softer. She sang lullabies in Occitan. She braided her daughter's hair with silk ribbons. She sat by the ocean with a shawl and a book of prayers. But there was one line in a courtier's journal small, easily overlooked, that hints at something deeper. He wrote, "The queen walks in the gardens late and speaks to no one. Only the stars know what she says." A poetic line, yes, but one that suggests longing. And some said in hushed tones that she once loved a man who never noticed her. A night with ink-stained fingers and a wound that never healed. It may not be true, but tonight it does not matter. What matters is this, that she once stood on a balcony, hair unbound, whispering a poem into the night air, not for anyone to hear, but simply to let it go. And now, the wind grows softer, the halls more shadowed, the footsteps slower. We are not quite finished, dear listener, but you may find your eyes are now heavier. You may imagine yourself walking beside these queens, not in judgment, not in fear, but in recognition. They lived richly, they touched silks and kissed rings, but they also watched birds in flight. They whispered in gardens, They longed, just as you do, for warmth, for closeness, for something unnameable and soft. Their names may be faded, but their quiet moments still breathe. Let the night take you now. There's still more, but not just yet. For now, breathe and rest. Let the world fall away a little more. Let your breath deepen, slow and natural. And let your mind rest in this quiet place of distant queens, fading perfumes, and old, unopened letters. Tonight we continue with another figure, one whose life was more myth than memory. Queen Melisende of Jerusalem. Her name sounds like honey, doesn't it, Melisende? Like something you'd whisper to a candle just before sleep. She was queen in a strange time, the 1001, hundreds when Crusader kings ruled in cities that baked beneath eastern suns, surrounded by gardens of pomegranates and stone walls that hummed with heat. Melisende wasn't the consort. She was crowned in her own right, ruler of Jerusalem. Her father gave her the throne, but her husband wanted it too. So did her son, and in the shadows of the church and sword, Melisende ruled anyway, not with iron, but with intelligence. She surrounded herself with scribes, monks, diplomats. She built libraries, scriptoriums, and chapels. She read deeply. In her psalter, richly illustrated and bound in gold, you can find delicate drawings of her, seated in profile, calm as the moon, gaze steady. There are whispers, of course there are, that she was close to one of her artists, that she spent long hours in the gardens with a certain nun, discussing more than scripture. But Melisende never answered these whispers. She ruled. She wrote letters that still survive in a hand both elegant and sharp. Imagine her now, standing on a balcony, pale green robe caught in the wind, the scent of jasmine and old ink clinging to the air. She does not need to speak. The night understands her. Now, a gentle turn, to northern Italy, to Mantua. There, a woman named Isabella d'Este sits beneath a frescoed ceiling, her fingers drumming lightly on the cover of a poetry book. She was never crowned queen, but she ruled nonetheless. She was Marchesa, a noble title, and wielded more cultural power than many kings. Leonardo painted for her, so did Bellini, and behind every brushstroke was her vision, but even among her accomplishments, people whispered. She was said to have secret lovers, men of music and marble, and perhaps women too. A famed madrigalist wrote verses with double meanings. Courtiers said she hosted late night salons where politics and sensuality blurred. Did she, or did her presence, simply awaken something in the minds of those two, bound by rules to understand grace? Imagine her now, reclining on a velvet couch, a caged bird singing in the corner, lace veils floating like cobwebs through the room, and her mind fixed not on desire, but design, a sculpture, a tapestry, a better world. She was never what they expected, and that was her quiet rebellion. We drift now softer still to the cold, cloudy lands of Sweden. There, in the early 1600s, reigned Queen Christina, born to rule, but never meant to obey. Christina was strange, they said. She wore men's boots, refused to marry, refused even to sit like a lady. She surrounded herself with philosophers, scientists, thinkers from all over Europe. She spoke 5 languages, read 10. She turned her court into a salon of the mind and ignored the church's frowns. And yes, there were rumors of close handmaidens, of nights spent in private rooms with female courtiers, of refusing suitors in favor of something unspoken. Christina eventually abdicated her throne. She converted to Catholicism and moved to Rome, where she surrounded herself with art, men in robes, women in jewels, and conversation that never quite ended. Was she perverted, as her enemies claimed, or was she simply uninterested in the narrow corridor that had been carved for her? She once wrote, "I am neither man nor woman. I am Christina, Queen of Sweden." Let that linger. Now we move again to the gentle coastline of France, to a castle surrounded by slow tides and wet stone. Here lived Louise of Savoy, mother to a king, and ruler in his absence. Louise was quiet, not in mind but in manner. She kept journals full of secret thoughts. She wrote about politics in metaphors. she watched everything and revealed little. Some historians now believe she shaped more of French history than her son ever did. She corresponded with monarchs and mystics. She held meetings behind tapestries. She wore gloves not only for elegance, but to keep others from seeing where her hands had been. Did she have lovers? There are letters that suggest so. Carefully worded, rich in metaphor, but more than that, she had power, and power in the hands of a woman was always repainted in rumors. Imagine her now, sitting in a high, backed chair beside a fire, a book open on her lap, a letter tucked inside like a secret. She gazes into the flame, thinking of things you and I will never know, and that is the beauty of her now. The fire dims, the tapestries sway a little more slowly. The footsteps of the past grow softer, lighter, like dust settling on a worn stone stair. We end this part of our journey with one final queen for the night, not by blood, not by title, but by presence. Her name is unknown, a peasant girl, perhaps, who caught the eye of a king, or a nobleman's daughter married off and forgotten. History did not record her scandals, or perhaps it hid them too well. But imagine her, alone in a chamber, a simple one. She touches the window with her fingertips. The glass is cold. The stars beyond are silent. She smiles, because she knows something no one else does. A secret love, a hidden letter, a memory so delicate it can only live in silence. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, know that she, like all the women we've met, was real. Maybe not in name, but in feeling. In breath, in a world where queens were not always crowned, sometimes they simply were. Let us step gently into a different kind of story tonight. One less about crowns and more about corners, hidden alcoves, forbidden passageways, and velvet letters pressed into trembling hands. We begin with Eleanor of Aquitaine, yes, a name you may know, but you do not know her this way. Born in the golden, wine-rich lands of Aquitaine, she was a duchess by 15, married to the King of France by 19, and then, later, Queen of England, twice a queen, mother to kings, but more than that, Eleanor was a force. Poets followed her, knights bowed to her, and in her court at Poitiers, she created something almost unreal. A world of love courts, can you imagine it? A great stone hall hung with silks, women in embroidered gowns, their voices like music, sitting in a half circle while troubadours sang tales of longing and clever riddles. They discussed love like it was law. They judged the sincerity of sonnets. They asked questions such as, can true love exist within marriage? And the answers were never simple. Eleanor's court was like a dream woven in gold thread. But it wasn't just words. She defied her husband, rode in armor, led a rebellion. And when captured, she was locked away. For 15 years. 15. In silence. Imagine her in a castle high above the moors, pacing beneath stained glass windows, her hair silvering, her mind alive with poetry and memory. They tried to quiet her, but queens like Eleanor are made of quieter fire. Now, let's walk softly into the shadows of Aragon, the Iberian Peninsula, around 1400. Here, a queen named Maria of Castile ruled while her husband King Alfonso V spent most of his time in Naples. Maria was not glamorous, she was methodical, but within her court, behind the tall shutters and Moorish arches, she kept a chamber of secrets. It was a salon, a library, and something else. There, she gathered women scholars. They studied Arabic texts. They discussed medical knowledge, astrology, the art of spice blending. There were whispers that these gatherings turned into something more intimate, after the lamps dimmed, that Maria shared affection with a noblewoman whose name was carefully scratched out of later records. A queen loving a woman, in the age of inquisitions, perhaps. Or perhaps the mere idea of women thinking together unwatched was scandalous enough to birth rumors of desire. Either way, Maria left behind a world more orderly and beautiful than the one she was handed. She ruled not by sword or scandal, but by intellect. Now let's cross into colder lands again, to the castle, lit hills of Bohemia. There we find Queen Cunigund of Hohenstaufen. She was wife to King Wenceslaus, but rarely seen beside him. Instead, She was known for wandering the gardens alone, writing verses, and leaving them tucked into prayer books in the cathedral. Some of these were found decades later, faint ink on yellowed pages describing the sensation of watching a woman's hair being braided, or the ache of longing unspoken. Soft, mournful, intimate. Was she speaking of courtly friendship? Or something more? We'll never know, but in the quiet hour of dusk, Cunigund would often light a single candle, pour mulled wine into a small cup, and listen to the monks sing beneath the rose window of Prague's cathedral. That was her heaven. Now, let us rest a while with someone less known, a queen who ruled only by marriage and shadow. Her name is now lost, but she lived in a keep high in the Alps near present-day Austria. Married young, sent away from her home, she found herself isolated, surrounded by stone, snow, and silence. But in that quiet, she discovered a kind of peace. She learned to read not just Latin, but Greek. She painted small icons on walnut panels. She tamed a lynx cub. And in her diaries still preserved in a Benedictine archive, she wrote long, lyrical descriptions of her handmaiden's voice. Asterisk, she speaks. She wrote, and the stone of the castle warms, even in frost. There is no record of scandal, but there is something deeper. Tenderness, companionship, the quiet love of shared silences. Tonight, you can almost hear them. Soft footfalls across rush, covered floors. Laughter by a fire, a sigh into a shoulder, a shared sleep beneath a fur-lined quilt. These two were queens, not by title, but by presence. Our tale tonight begins not in a grand hall, but in a garden. A quiet, walled garden hidden behind a palace in Burgundy. The year is 1442, and the queen is Isabel of Portugal, Duchess of Burgundy. They called her the Quiet Pearl. She did not dazzle the court with diamonds, nor with drama. But her presence was absolute. She was educated, fluent in politics, in trade, in fashion. And yet, what most remembered even in their gossip was how she walked barefoot on dewy grass every morning. In the garden, among roses, lavender, and sage, she was said to speak to the plants, to hum softly, and to host tea with her ladies not in the formal rooms but under willow trees. She introduced a strange new custom to court life. Journals, each of her ladies, and later even her husband's scribes, were asked to keep a small book bound in leather in which they wrote their thoughts, their fears, their dreams. Some of these survive, and tucked in the margins are words that suggest longing, not always for men, sometimes for each other, sometimes for a touch never offered, or one that lingered longer than expected. Isabel never wrote her own. Or if she did, they were hidden too well, but the garden still remains, and when the wind is just right, it's said that you can smell the ghost of lilac and cinnamon and hear her humming. Now, let's move slowly north. To Denmark, the reign of Queen Margaret I, around the late 1300s. She was a ruler like no other, uniting three kingdoms, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, under her single, formidable hand. But she ruled not with violence, not even with pageantry. Margaret wore simple robes, slept in a monk's cell even as she controlled empires. She believed in order, in service, and she trusted few, but among those she trusted was a woman, a companion who traveled with her for years, always unnamed, always close. Chroniclers call her a maid, but they describe her riding beside the queen, eating at her table, sleeping in an adjacent chamber. What was between them, the documents do not say, but in one letter hidden among royal archives, Margaret writes, "There is no greater loyalty than that of one who stays even in silence." A queen, and her quiet shadow, perhaps that is love too. Now, farther still into the Ottoman world. Here, history offers us a more complicated queen, not a sultana by birth, but by wit. Hurrem Sultan, also known in the West as Roxolana, rose from slavery to become the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a rarity, and yet, beyond the grandeur, the politics, and the poetry, there are soft tales of the palace's inner court, of how Hurrem gathered the harem women not just for dances, but for storytelling. of how she encouraged the older concubines to teach younger ones embroidery, medicinal herbs, and song. There is an Ottoman diary written by a Greek physician that mentions Hürrem's special fondness for a handmaid who composed lullabies in multiple languages. They were often seen together in the courtyard, laughing. The physician writes, "There was something in the way they looked at one another, like a history older than this empire. Perhaps it was affection, perhaps it was simply understanding. Even so, beneath the silks and perfumes, Hürrem's softness lived on. Not in the pages of war, but in the hands she held and the songs she remembered. And now, with the wind carrying jasmine again, let us slow to a near stillness. One final queen for tonight's chapter. She ruled nothing. She held no court. She was not written about in any chronicle. But once, in a convent in southern France, near a village of lavender and bees, a novice named Claire wrote a poem in the margins of her prayer book. It read, 'She braided my hair today. She did not speak, but I felt her fingers say, I will remember you always.' No name, no history, just that. And yet, in that moment, a kind of royalty, there are queens of crowns. Queens of blood and queens of memory made not by lineage, but by how they made others feel. Claire's poem is still there, pressed into vellum, resting in a quiet monastery archive where no one reads it. But time, tonight, let's drift to Anjou, a quiet stretch of land in 13th century France wine fields, cobbled towns, and the distant toll of chapel bells. In a high stone manor, one queen walks with quiet purpose. Marguerite of Provence, Queen of France, wife to the stern and pious Louis Roman IX. But Marguerite, she was not born to stillness. She was raised among laughter, the scent of citrus, songs in the Provençal tongue. And sisters, 3 of them all royal, all sharp as their mother's silver combs. Marguerite loved stories, but not the kind men told. She made her own. At court, her husband kept her at distance, too absorbed in devotion. So she created her own court, in her chambers, a tapestry of women poets, ladies, in waiting, scribes, and there was one named Alice, a noblewoman from Toulouse, bright, quiet, skilled in languages and embroidery. They were seen often together, heads bowed over tapestries or strolling in the gardens near the convent school. It is said they wrote a livre de coeur, a book of the heart, a hand-stitched volume of verses, dried violets, and prayers written for one another. It is lost now, but a single page preserved by accident survives in a nunnery ledger. In her silence, I found the warmth the saints denied me. Was it friendship? Was it more? No chronicler dared to say. But centuries later, the ink still breathes. Let's move forward in time now, to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, around 1405, a lesser-known court, but not without grace. There, in the snowy fortresses and dense pine forests, lived Queen Anna of Poland, wife of King Jagala. Anna was no beauty, they said, but she had something better, stillness, and a mind that absorbed everything. She kept her own library rare for queens of her region, collected recipes, spoke 3 languages. But her days were not marked by royal decrees, rather by letters. She kept up correspondence with a woman in a Benedictine cloister. The letters were ordinary at first, advice on healing salves, herbal tinctures, worries about the king's cold, but over time the language softened. Your voice in ink soothes the fire behind my ribs. Anna once wrote. The woman replied, let us meet in dreams by the gate of the orchard. No one knows if they ever met again. But the orchard gate appears again and again in Anna's later prayers. Now let's drift even further, into the chilly North Sea winds, to Scotland, late 1400s. A kingdom of stone towers and fog, and a queen, Margaret of Denmark, married into the Scottish crown. They called her cold, too reserved, but few knew what she carried in her silence. She had been sent across sea and snow to marry a king she had never met. He was rough, restless. She found solace in the castle chapel. And in the queen's garden, there, she kept company with a certain musician, a woman named Lorne, whose harp was said to weep when she played. Margaret spent long hours in her presence, especially in winter. There are no letters, no portraits, only a surviving piece of sheet music titled in Latin for her who listens. In the margins, let her fingers always find home as mine never did. And then the music ends. But the silence it leaves is filled with meaning. Now, a final flicker before sleep takes you fully, the Mediterranean breeze. We are in Naples, early 1500s. The court is loud, perfumed, full of peacocks and proclamations. But in a quiet corner of the palace walks Joanna of Aragon, daughter of kings, forgotten by most. She never ruled, never married, but she kept cats, and she hosted salons for young girls who were being married off often too young, often too scared. Joanna taught them how to read, how to speak without being loud, how to sit without permission, how to say no without using the word. She was their queen. Once, a visitor to the court remarked, "There is a woman here whose gaze can silence a trumpet." Joanna never wrote memoirs, but the young girls she taught became women, and their daughters remembered her. They called her the queen who saved without a crown. We begin this time not in a throne room, but in a quiet writing room deep inside the Alcazar of Seville. The year is 1458, and the queen is Isabella of Portugal, mother to the future Queen Isabella of Castile. But on this night, she is just herself, a woman who cannot sleep. History says she suffered melancholy, long spells of sadness, retreats behind walls when the court grew too loud. But she found comfort in letter, writing, not official ones, private ones, unsent, tucked in a cedarwood box beside her rosary. Many were addressed to a woman named Inez, not a noble, not a lady, in waiting, just Inez, a healer's daughter who once lived near the old palace orchard. The two met during a fever outbreak, Isabella weak. Inez bold, she brought lemon water and stories about the stars. In her letters, Isabella recalls the scent of honey on Inez's hands, the way she pressed a cool cloth to her brow without fear. One letter says, "You never bowed, and I loved you for that." None of these letters were sent, but someone, a careful nun, perhaps kept them, and today they sleep in a museum drawer, unread for centuries except now. By you, far away in Hungary, we find another queen, Elizabeth of Luxembourg, crowned Holy Roman Empress in the early 1400. But titles meant little to her. She preferred gardens and dogs and collecting moss in tiny boxes. There was one box different from the rest. Inside was a lock of hair not her husband's, not her son's, but golden, tied with red thread. No name was written, but near the bottom of the box a note, "For the one who saw through my silence." Elizabeth ruled during turbulent times, wars, betrayals, and yet she kept a correspondence with a Benedictine abbess known for her poems. Historians now believe many of the abbess's surviving works were addressed to Elizabeth. They are full of longing, of warmth, of phrases that seem like lullabies. "You are the light that breaks through old stone." No one ever confirmed who she meant, but Elizabeth's tomb was found with the abbess's ribboned verse laid near her hand. Now, let us move softly across snow again to Russia, early 1600s. The Tsardom, in its deep winters, its candlelit churches, its icy rivers. A Tsaritsa, Marfa Ivanovna, the mother of Mikhail Romanov, first of a dynasty. Marfa did not ask for power. She was swept into it. She lived in cold stone rooms, shrouded in furs, rarely seen. But within the women's quarters, she ruled with quiet strength. She refused male doctors. Instead, she appointed a circle of female herbalists, many of whom had once been peasants. One of them, Agnesa, was known for her skill with birch oil and her gift for singing prayers in a voice so low it trembled the floors. Marfa insisted Agnesa stay by her bedside even when the priests disapproved. A single entry from a guard's journal reads, "She spoke to the woman more than her son. They shared silence and glances full of old snow and fire." Agnesa later vanished. Marfa stopped speaking altogether, but a woven belt covered in symbols for healing and eternity was found in Marfa's locked chest. Perhaps Agnesa made it. Perhaps she wore it. Now, let's pause. Breathe in. There's one more door to open tonight, We step into the soft hills of Bohemia, early 1500s. Morning mists curl around apple trees, and in a modest villa outside Prague lives Queen Anna of Bohemia and Hungary. She was not loud, but she loved the arts. She painted tiny icons. She kept a pet deer, and once she invited a wandering scholar, a woman dressed as a man, to stay and copy rare manuscripts. They became close. Anna let the scholar read aloud to her at night. Poems, stories of older queens, even soft translations of Plato's Symposium with all the loving words left in. Anna kept one volume by her bed. Pressed between pages was a dried poppy. On the inner cover, written in Latin, "What cannot be spoken, let us feel." And when Anna died, the deer stopped eating and the scholar vanished from the record, but the book remains, held now in the Czech National Library. Unremarkable to many, except for the soft way it smells like old dreams and summer fields, let us begin this final whisper in the gentle heart of Tuscany, around 1345. There, in a sun-kissed villa surrounded by vineyards, lived a widow once called Queen Constanza of Aragon. Her royal days were behind her, the court gone, the jewels packed away, but Constanza didn't retreat in bitterness. She gathered artists, poets, widows like herself, and girls whose marriages had ended before they began. They called her Madrina Godmother. She made her garden a sanctuary. Lavender in the breeze, worn pages read aloud under olive trees, laughter from lips no longer under watch. There was one visitor who came often, a woman named Francesca, a former lady, in waiting to a rival queen, soft eyes, a limp from an old riding fall, a soul that had not been treated kindly by men. Constanza gave her a place to stay, a place to grow herbs, to write. They were seen together, always sharing meals from the same bowl, watching the stars in silence. When Constanza passed, her last will left her villa not to her children, but to Francesca, with only 6 words written in her own hand, to she who made time kind. It was not scandalous. It was not spoken of, but the villagers still call that house Casa del Durigin, House of the Two Queens. Far across the sea and further back in time, let us pause in Byzantium, the 10th century. Marble halls, icons glimmering in oil light, a world of incense and silk, of sacred oaths and shadowed corners. There lived Theophano, a woman married into the imperial line, fierce, intelligent, blamed for many things. But what they did not tell, what the chroniclers left out, was her bond with her servant and scribe, Zoe. Zoe was educated, wrote in Greek, Latin, Arabic, read to Theophano from the Psalms, but also the old poets, Sappho and Aspasia. Their scrolls are filled with quiet notes, margins filled with symbols, stars, birds, half, moons. One surviving document from Theophano's treasury includes a phrase, "You held the flame when I could not." Later, when Theophano fell from favor, Zoe went with her. Exiled not by law, but by choice. They died on an island together, remembered only in whispers. But every time a new scroll is uncovered from that era, carefully unrolled by scholars in white gloves, Zoe's handwriting is there. Not a queen in name, but perhaps something deeper. And now, for the final story, the last candle, a queen whose name has nearly vanished. Roxolana, the favorite consort of Suleiman the Magnificent, known in Europe as Hurrem Sultan. Most know her as a political figure, a powerful schemer, a ruler from behind curtains, but few know of the woman she called Muran, a chamber musician from Persia. Muran wrote songs in secret languages, and Hurrem often left court in disguise just to hear her play. They never touched in public, never wrote what could be found, but in Hurrem's private quarters, embroidered on her prayer rug, was a single line of Persian poetry, "To the one whose music unspooled my silence," and among her many gifts to mosques and schools, she commissioned one small room with a skylight for a woman of sound and shadow, where music could echo endlessly. Muran was buried near her under a nameless stone, but nearby a rose bush still grows. Even now, and now we come to the end, the final breath of the final tale. You've walked the shadowed paths of forgotten palaces, heard whispers that crossed time, And maybe, just maybe, you felt the softness of their lives, not just the politics of their crowns. These were not queens remembered for scandal, but for sweetness, for their silences, for the hands they held in moonlight, and the words they wrote only for one pair of eyes. Let your body soften now. Let the hush of history cradle you. No need to remember, no need to try, just breathe and sleep, with the warmth of queens curling beside your dreams.